So welcome to the last panel for this conference. We have still a few people trickling in. So like I did for the other panels, I'll introduce the moderator and she will introduce the rest of the panel. Marion Nestle also doesn't need much of an introduction. She's the Paulette Goddard Professor at NYU's Department of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health. And I have a personal thank you because if I'm a professor now, I owe it to her who decided to hire me when I was a journalist, like 12 years ago. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And she writes her blog, Food Politics. It's very interesting, but most of you might know her for her books, her Food Politics, How the Food Industry Influences Nutrition and Public Health, has become not only a classic, but a really important text for anybody who's trying to understand food and food systems. It's not her only book. Safe Food, The Politics of Food Safety came out in 2003. What to Eat, very interesting, very useful book, came out in 2006. Pet Food Politics, Feed Your Pet Right, Why Calories Count, and a book of cartoons, Eat, Drink, Vote, an illustrated guide to food politics that appeared in 2013. I strongly recommend that. It's a very interesting idea of how to communicate about complicated issues on food. Marion, thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. Yeah, I mean, was in our department, and now he's here, and it's really exciting to have him here, and what's happening here and in our department and everywhere else is really exciting. So thanks for coming. This panel is called The Power of the Public Plate, Policy and Procurement. It's got a lot of P's in the title. And when I first saw it, I was really puzzled about what it was about, because to me, procurement has something to do with sex. And I thought, why are we discussing this at this meeting about Gotham on a plate? And of course, the reason we're discussing it is because what this entire conference is about is a reflection of what's going on in the food movement these days, how food is changing, how it's being incorporated into people's lives in a way that has never happened before, and how people are studying it in ways that have never happened before. And to me, in that particular context, procurement is about how you change the food system by using public institutions to call for foods that are healthier for people and the planet. In the same way that McDonald's is changing its procurement practices to require that its suppliers use meat from animals that have not been raised with antibiotics, public institutions have the same kind of power to do those things. And so we've assembled a group of speakers here, panelists here, who are either theoretically or practically involved in procurement policies on a day-to-day level. And the four speakers starting from this end are Barbara Turk, who has the job that everybody in the world wanted, which is the head food policy person for Mayor DeBlasio's administration. And then next we have Eric Goldstein, who has probably one of the most important public procurement policies positions in the world, because he is responsible for buying the food for New York City's nearly 900,000 school children every day. He works in the Department of Education. Janet Poppendieck is the author of three really extraordinary books about the food system and food policy, and her book about school food was an instantaneous classic. Food for All was, she started out, maybe she'll tell you about this, that she started out writing it as an analysis of school food and ended up writing it as a polemic for universal school meals. And I use her books, at least one of her books, in every class I teach. And then finally, Tom Forster, who's an expert on food systems and who was on the committee that developed this panel. So you really should thank him for putting the panel together. And what I've asked the panelists to do is to start by explaining what their role is in food procurement, both in a practical way. What do they do on a day-to-day basis? What are their jobs like? But then also the deep rationale for why they are doing what they're doing, sort of the theoretical framework that they're working out of in order to do what they do. And then also to say something about how they got into this position, because that seems to be a major theme that has come up in this conference, is how did you get to where you are today? And so on that note, I'll just say something about how I got to this position today, and that was that I started out as an undergraduate teacher in a biology department at a small liberal arts college, and I was given a nutrition course to teach. And it was as simple as that, and I've never looked back. It was like falling in love, and I've never looked back. So one thing led to another, and here we all are. So let me start with, I guess we'll just do it in order. Barbara, why don't you start out and tell everybody who you are, how you got there, what you do, and why you're doing it.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Marion. And thank you, Tom, for organizing the panel, and all the students at New School have been part of this. We appreciate you. So the short answer to the first question is that I've had a very eclectic career, but always in public service, both in government and in nonprofit organizations, and always focused on work related to poverty, public health, human rights. I guess that would be the list, and all interrelated. And I think related to this position in particular, I work for Deputy Mayor Lillian Barrios Paoli, who some of you may know has had a long and distinguished career in city government, also in nonprofits. Somebody I admire deeply. And she was looking for someone who understood the issues and understood how to make things actually happen in New York City government. So the job that I have, it would actually be great, it would actually be great if I only had to have ideas. I think as a practical matter, I benefit from all the great work that's done by people on the panel and in the room, and our moderator and everyone who has really thought through these issues seriously for many, many years and instigated so much change already. But the idea is to try to figure out how we make some of these things that we've talked about for a long time manifest in New York City. We have at least 20 agencies in New York City that have something to do with food. As it relates to procurement, the policy office, we are working with all those agencies on food insecurity, health and nutrition. We are side by side working to use all the levers of city government. Procurement is one of them to improve food and nutrition, but it is also the budget process, the contracting process. Land use is important because we think a lot about where all the people who are going to be who are living in New York City and will be living as we continue to rezone the city and build out more affordable housing are actually going to eat and buy food. So those are all the kinds of battles that we are part of. And I say battles only because I do play a kind of an internal advocacy role and a convening role and trying to align all the players. New York City is a very big place, as you know, 300,000 employees, $75 billion operating budget, that's with a B. So it's keeping track and keeping everyone aligned, hopefully, toward specific goals. I would say that the overarching guide stone or touchstone for the work is the guide stone for the North Star for this administration, which is equity. And So everything we're working on relates to making sure that everybody, regardless of their income, has enough healthy and nutritious food to eat in New York City. And procurement is particularly important in this regard because if you think about who the city is procuring food for in its procurement, it is some of the most marginalized and poor people in New York. So that's a little bit about what I do and why I do it.
All right, we'll get to the questions later. Eric,
Yeah.
you want to?
Sure. My name is Eric Goldstein. I'm the chief executive of an office that's called School Support Services at the New York City Department of Education, and there I wear several hats. So I oversee our school food program, and in addition to the school food program, I also oversee transportation and sports. In the vernacular, we call that buses, beans, and balls. So we got all those operational units. In addition to that, I'm also the chairman of a group that we formed called the Urban School Food Alliance. You can see that on urbanschoolfoodalliance.org, which is a cooperative group between New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, Dallas, and Orlando, our school food districts, and we joined together to not only use our sort of platform as some of the great cities in America and what we're doing, certainly with an urban focus on our school meals program, but also to band together as a small C collective to really use our purchasing power to really try to bend and change the food systems. And as Professor Nestle was talking about before, about the title of this, and as she mentioned in Introduction to Procurement, and thinking about it briefly, it's really about what money does to food and what food does to money. And we're very sensitive and very deliberate these days in New York City, at the mayoral level, and certainly at the agency level, about making sure that we use that purchasing power, we use that money in an institutional way to try to bend or reshape food systems. And I know we'll have some examples, a food-related example that's a recent one, is the Urban School Food Alliance in cooperation with Tony LaCourie and her group at School Food Focus, thank you, put together some standards for antibiotic-free chicken. And each district is going to bid separately. New York City our bid's coming out in the next couple of weeks. We were a little nervous putting this out. We're worried that we have very limited dollars to spend. Our ability to spend is big, but yet constricted in many ways, because in government, and for those not in government, and I spent most of my career in the private sector before coming to government, government has to balance two things. They have to balance process, and they have to balance results. And it's very easy in government to focus only on process, because that's really where you can get in trouble. If the process goes wrong, there are all sorts of agencies out there looking to get you in trouble. That's just the truth of how it works, frankly. So the key thing as leaders, with Barbara and with Mayor DeBlasi and with other people, you have to also really focus on results and then have process as subservient to the results you want to achieve from a policy point of view. Trust me, having been in this battle for a long time, it's a lot easier said than done, but it's very important from a leadership point of view to have that orientation. So we talk to industry. We have to work with industry. We're large providers. We do now upwards in New York City. We're punching through the 1 million meal a day mark just in New York City. As the Urban School Food Alliance, for those 6 cities I mentioned, we're doing 500 million meals a day. So it's big, big stuff. So you have to rely on big suppliers who can make sure that when our children, as Barbara mentioned, a lot of our children come from the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder. So when they come there for lunch, there is a lunch not only there, it has to be there. And getting it there doesn't happen by accident nor by magic. But it has to not only be there, but it has to be of the best value that we can bring in terms of looking at food and service and all that sort of stuff. So we were nervous about putting out these requirements. We put them out. Industry has responded very well. And then it was brought at McDonald's a few months later. It came out with standards that mimic that to a large degree. Believe it or not, we breathed a sigh of relief. That was a really good validation of what we're trying to do. And when you have all these different forces acting on industry, they start to respond to that and they start to change. And that's where you make this wholesale change. So it's pretty exciting to be a part of that and to work with my colleagues here on the panel, on stage, and in the audience on making that change, on bending and reshaping that change.
Jan.
Okay, so I don't have the practical responsibilities. I procure for a household of 2. But a couple of years ago, when we first started the New York City Food Policy Center, where I'm the policy director, we had written into our proposal to the City Council that we would do an overview of institutional meals in New York City. And by a process that I don't even want to recall, that kind of landed in my lap. So what I thought I would do with my couple minutes is tell you the things that surprised me when I had to take a systematic look at last year it was almost 250 million meals that were served under the auspices of New York City agencies. The lion's share are Eric's meals, but the Department of Correction, the Agency for Child Services, the Department for the Aging, a number of city agencies. There are at least 5 agencies that serve more than 10 million meals a year. So when I went to look at that, the first thing that impressed me was the size. I think about trying to fix a Thanksgiving dinner for extended family and how difficult and challenging I find that. And the meals at the volume we're talking about is enormous. But the second thing that really impressed me about the public plate was its reach into the lives of New Yorkers, because it's not just sustenance, dining for the school children or the people in the homeless shelters or the people in Rikers. It's also jobs, very important jobs in New York City. And I believe that jobs on the school calendar are something that should be nurtured and expanded and made full use of, because those are jobs that work for parents, people who are balancing parenting and income earning. So important as jobs. It's important as business opportunities. Think about the suppliers, the vendors, the agencies that make their living supplying New York City. One of the groups involved here are distributors. At the conference I just went to, I learned that many distributors that have school systems as clients, that's their major business. Everything else they do is kind of gravy, because supplying the schools. And finally, food programs, meals served in New York City are very important assistance to the household budgets of low-income New Yorkers. If you have 3 children in school and they can get breakfast and lunch at school, that's a relief to your budget. And because New York is such a high cost of living place to live, it's really crucial to big sections of our population. I was impressed to learn that there's kind of a process that, regardless of the agency and the auspice, it pretty much starts with menu planning and then goes to procurement, and then you have to go back and adjust the menu because of the realities of the procurement, and then there's preparation, and then there's serving, and then there's cleanup and waste management. So none of these meals it doesn't stop with procurement, for sure. I was almost overwhelmed by the complexity of the regulatory environment, and as Eric says, each time there's a set of regulations, there's an opportunity to get in trouble. So there are food safety regulations, thank goodness. Okay, there are nutrition regulations, there are eligibility regulations, there are procurement regulations, you have to have competitive bidding, and et cetera. There are financial and accounting regulations, and there are regulations that apply to the accommodation of the special needs of consumers. If you're supplying meals in the Department of Correction, you have to deal with people who keep kosher or observe halal. And then there are reporting requirements associated with each of those kinds of regulations. And finally, I was amazed at the challenges that relate to the actual physical distribution and delivery and moving food around the city, and the amount that the distributors have to budget for traffic fines, because, for instance, schools in New York City were built long before there was a notion of loading docks. Many of them don't have any access to the back of the school from the street. So it's a huge challenge. And again, schools are the big chunk, but when you add it all up, it's an even bigger. And in that challenge is the opportunity that Eric and Marion and Barbara have alluded to do, the notion of mindful eating. Well, this is kind of like mindful procurement, to procure as if the environment mattered, as if the region mattered, the economy mattered, as if people's health mattered. So I think it's a fascinating field, and I do want to say that the New York City Food Policy Center at Hunter College and the CUNY School of Public Health has a report. You can download it from our website. It is indeed called The Public Plate in New York City. And I also have show and tell, and I really should let Eric do this. This is the new tray plate for school food. This is the one to replace all those styrofoam. There will be 124 million a year of these, and they are biodegradable. So maybe we'll
like plates.
talk. Yes, and
They actually look like plates.
right. Look how uninstitutional this looks. So, it's great. So,
Thank you, Jane. Tom?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's an honor to be joining all of you and to be in front of this audience again. Like Barbara, I have a bit of an eclectic background and came to procurement through a series of steps. First, though, I'll just start from now and kind of work in the backwards. I do teach here, and I'm teaching a course on feeding cities, policies and governance right now, where the public plate is really part of, but a big part of the course curriculum, where the private plate is also a big part of it. And this relationship between the two, which is complex, fascinating, and Eric alluded to in the example of McDonald's, the possibility, very real possibility, that the work going on in institutional procurement change is having on a larger commercial market. At School Food Focus, which is where the bulk of my time, I work for Tony LaQuarrie, who's here, in a national network of 45 districts, larger districts, and this work started right here with the Office of School Food, and we'll come back to the question of maybe what's learned here that's useful elsewhere, what's learned elsewhere that's useful here in this very complicated area of food system change using the leveraging power of institutional buyers. But before New York, I actually spent almost a decade working on removal of one boulder as surveyed across school food service professionals in the year 2000, that the prohibition against including geography or local or whatever you called your definition of local, out of the, across the federal code, prohibition still exists. And it took 2 farm bills to create an exemption for what? Child nutrition programs. It's the only place in institutional procurement under the federal acquisition regulations that has this exemption. And now, actually with this administration, a much more progressive approach to training and technical assistance, and much wider than applying geographic preferences in bidding contracts by schools of any size. There are all kinds of other ways that are utilized to add to, as you said, mindful procurement is now more than just geography. We'll come back to that. I think there's some very exciting dimensions of mindful procurement that are being developed right here in New York and elsewhere in the country. But I also work at the international level, and one of the unique things about New York is that the headquarters of the UN system is here, and the relationship between food and cities is very hot right now. Oh, a little closer. Okay, sorry. So in that context, we're seeing an international rise as well as a domestic rise in interest in procurement. So I think there's a lot of potential for cross-fertilization. We might talk about that in the context of the cities that are learning from each other around the world later. But I think the why question for me is realizing somewhere around 10 or 15 years ago that procurement systems are like the software of our food system in a way. They're the operating systems of food flows between buyers and sellers, farmers and markets, and procurement is a lot more than just about dollars. Like we heard yesterday in the panel on hunger, that hunger isn't going to be solved by food alone. So too, procurement is a lot more than just dollars and transactional relationships. There are all kinds of other regulatory and institutional relationships, and perhaps we'll get into a little bit of that as we go along here. I'll stop at that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this gives you sort of a general overview. What I'd like you to try to do is to try to give a concrete example of how in the work that you're doing or in the kinds of things you think about, buying better food and having a more powerful way of acquiring food might move the system in the direction that you want it to go to. And Tom, why don't you start with that? And then we'll just work down this way.
So to remain at the scale that we're talking about, that is relevant for New York, you heard, if you were here yesterday, Karen Karp talk about the early phase of work. Again, Tony LaCorey was very much a leader of that effort called School Food Plus, which actually was where there were some very significant buys from the region of product that in some cases replaced other product within the school food menu. But getting there were lots and lots of other steps. More recently, I think the process by which procurement change happens is just as important as the end result. And one of the things that I think School Food Focus has learned, and a lot of this is from the early years experience in New York, is that you really have to have the top decision makers in the room, and you have to have their partners who are going to work with them who may not be within the school district. And it's up to them to who those partners may be to be most effective. But you also need a very robust research and data management capacity so you can crunch the numbers. You have to have a safe space for the vendors and distributors and other actors in the supply chain to also discuss freely. So you can have those product, the business case can be made for the product decisions. It gets down to a very technical level, but
Well, that's why I'm trying to get you to give a very concrete example.
Sorry.
If you
So-
could give, name names if you can.
Oh, yeah, so,
And-
well, let me pick one in the second largest school district that is Chicago, where a whole muscle chicken was purchased in, what year was it, 2013, I believe, 2012 or 2013, where the actual volume there of procuring chicken was very significant for the fact that it included an antibiotic-free portion and also a regional supplier. It was an Amish farm in the Midwest that supplied it, as well as larger national suppliers. So that actually was the first sort of very large-scale procurement change in chicken, and chicken has gone on to be continuing to be one of the major product areas of procurement change. Working as Eric said on the antibiotic issue, but also working to actually procure whole muscle and
Whole muscle?
well, non-formed. Okay, so
Whole muscle?
chicken arrives,
That's
and we have to get into the weeds here, but there are lots of ways in which chicken is processed. And school districts around the country have been wanting to return to a more basic.
So whole
form.
muscle would be chicken parts, not nuggets.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a simple
Got
way of
it.
putting it. Yeah.
Got it. You have to speak to those of us who don't deal with these terms. No. Jan, you've been a major proponent of universal school meals for everybody. How would policies for buying foods feed into this, help this, make it easier, make it worse, whatever.
Okay, well, I think I want to take it the other direction. If we are able to move to universal free school meals for lunches citywide in New York, we have free lunches in the freestanding middle schools this year, and our figures show that participation is up around 8% in those middle schools. And it's been kind of flat in high schools and elementary schools, so that's a big change in, you know, in a policy that was implemented without a lot of publicity and fanfare. If we were able to move to universal free citywide, the potential, we would have many more students eating. It would go up not just probably 8% across the board, but over time, as students became accustomed to school lunch as a regular part of the school day, not stigmatized by, oh, that's poor kids' food, or that's welfare food, or free, as they sometimes call it, but a regular part of the school day and possibly, hopefully, integrated into the curriculum, then the power of procurement for impact on the regional economy, on suppliers, on the environment would be magnified. So the quickest connection is the more of this we do. And I left something out of my what I learned. My last little thing here that I forgot to say was, I learned that Uncle Sam is our big daddy. So much of the resource that we use as a city to do the procurement for public plate meals are federal dollars, and they're federal dollars that are provided on what's called performance funding basis, meaning you get reimbursed per compliant meal served. So the more we do, the more federal dollars we're bringing back to New York. You know, a lot of federal dollars originate in New York, but we're getting more of our share back to use in our own economy. So I would see that as the biggest connection there.
Great.
Although, on the other hand, the more fresh the whole muscle chicken, you know, the chicken part with bones, the drumstick, the thigh, tastes better. And therefore, the kids are going to enjoy the meals more. Mm-hmm. So the more fresh procurement and fresh preparation we can do, and maybe Eric wants to address some of the realities of this ideal that we have of scratch cooking in all our schools. But the more of it we can do, the better the meals, the more the kids are going to enjoy them, the more ready to learn they will be in the rest of the school day.
Oh, Eric, why don't you address some of those realities?
Some big realities. You know, every now and then there's these great stories that come out, which are both fascinating from an anthropological point of view and infuriating from a professional point of view. They have some great imagery of school food in America versus school food in the rest of the world. And of course, you can't wait to get to the French food, and the Italian food in Rome. And then, you know, in the office, we go back and you go, you know what? That's not fair. And the reason it's not fair is because in those countries, you just don't have the regulations that you have in the United States of America. The school meal program is extremely, extremely regulated. That's probably a good thing because, you know, across this country, in all due fairness to the rest of the country, it's not New York City. In parts of the country, they have different eating habits, they have different financial structures, they have different preferences, and the food sometimes could be, or in the past it has been, you know, just terribly fried and over-fried and just not very healthy, and haven't been very deliberative about that. So those regulations are good. It kind of levels out the playing field. But they are very prescribed. I mean, we're down to certain colors that we have to serve on certain days. And that's a good thing because you want to bring in more, you know, orange-colored vegetables, and it's brought in, you know, yams into our serving line and all these type of things. But it's heavily, heavily prescribed. So not only is it heavily prescribed, it's also, we don't have a lot of money to spend. We spend about, in New York City, about $1.25 on the actual food per meal per lunch. We are thinking of clever ways, and all the money comes from Washington. This is not city money. This is money that comes from Washington. So, as Jan said, that's super important, and the feds and the United States Department of Agriculture, they certainly are the big daddy here. We're thinking of ways on how to get more money to spend on food. One of the things we're pushing forward in New York City and as the Urban School Food Alliance is to raise this is particularly wonky, to
This is
raise
wonky.
something, yeah, this is wonky, to raise something called the commodity dollars.
Yeah.
We get a certain amount of extra federal money based on the number of lunches we serve. So to Jan's point, it's all interconnected. We're talking about systems here, as Tom mentioned. So the more meals we serve, the more kids eat, the more money we get, the more supplemental money we get, the more money we get, the more meals we serve. Through our deliberative procurement, we can get better food in, and it's just this it could be this virtuous circle. So we want to get more commodity dollars in to raise that allocation. We think that's something, as dysfunctional as Washington can be these days, as we all know, that's something that could possibly appeal to both Democrats and Republicans in the Congress, and that will enable us to buy better quality food and spend that money with American companies that give American workers jobs throughout the states. So again, it's a win-win-win if that happens. And again, our win from this is we have more money to spend on food, and the more money we have to spend on food, the more deliberative we can be about the food we purchase, and it goes on and on and on. I think you get my point to how things are interconnected and interrelated.
Great. Barbara, you feel free to comment on this too, but I'd also like you to say something about how you envision your enviable job. And what do you think you can do with it, and what can you do with it?
Yeah.
And what are you doing with it?
Yeah, well, let's talk about what we are doing with it, because that comes out of what we can do with it. You know, my job, I should say this point blank, my job is political.
Well, we're
Right.
going to get to the politics, but go right ahead.
No, but I think that's important. I think it's important to say, and when I say
Yeah.
political, I don't mean Democratic, Republican, or
No, I
anything like that,
understand.
right? So, you know,
But
and I say that
explain what you do mean.
yeah, I say this, it's a positive thing, actually, because a lot of the things that people are talking about just in terms of the nuts and bolts of getting this food to the table are, as you've all alluded to, governed by a set of relationships between I would bring the state into this too, between federal, state, and local governments. And so that part of it, in terms of negotiating those relationships, is very much part of my job. So one of the things we're doing right now is I think we have a unique opportunity to work differently with the state right now. And that I don't know if that surprises you or excites you, I hope both. There is just like procurement is in many ways a relationship business, so is government. And so we have a very strong relationship right now with our counterparts in the state, particularly Richard Ball. And Eric and I have both bonded with Richard. And he is the state commissioner of Ag and Markets, Agriculture and Markets, and absent an agriculture commissioner for the city, I am that de facto person, right? So he is my counterpart. We have developed, we've convened a joint city-state task force. We do a lot of task forces. It's a very important tool of government. But this one has a 90-day reporting period. So as we speak, that clock started ticking in February, and we're due to report to the governor and the mayor in May. And our goal here is it's a regional food hubs task force. Again, all these pieces are connected, so it's one thing to say, okay, we want to have a policy where we, local law 50, we buy local, right? We preference local provision. It's a whole other thing to think about how those contracts get done, but also how that food gets here. And we really can't have a situation where, we don't have the big industrial farms in New York State. It's a good thing. We have a lot of truck farms and, mid-sized farms, 50 to 200 acres. If Marcel Van Uwen was here, he would tell you all about it. And it's really not feasible or sustainable or a number of different things when we talk about mindful procurement. One of the mindfulnesses now is about whether we are doing harm to the environment. So we're trying to create a situation where we can have more places of aggregation, processing meaning cutting up the carrots and making them deliverable to schools, but not just schools. I want to put in a good word for our second highest consumer of food in New York City, which is our correctional system, all of our detention facilities, including Rikers Island, and bring this and get it into the city in a way that sustains the local economy and also produces fresher food and makes our system more resilient. We have a study going on right now because we know, and I think this is even more acute now, that we need to have multiple ways of getting food into the city and We can't just rely on a California supply or a New York supply, both because of our size and because of what we learned in Hurricane Sandy, which is a big focus of the city right now. So there's a number of different things. And I just will also add that, although I cannot talk about it today, I will say that Plan New York City is coming out on Earth Day. And this is a document, a real live living plan that has deliverables and indicators and outcomes that comes out every 4 years, although there was one kind of right after Sandy that was focused, a slim volume focused on resiliency. There is, as many people will tell you, many people have asked over the years, where is food in Plan YC? You will see food in Plan YC this time, and you'll see a lot of the things that we're hoping to focus on, both short-term and in the next 25 years.
Well, thank you. I was glad you mentioned the word politics, because that was my next question.
Yeah, because we should talk about politics.
What are the political forces that make your work, and what are the political forces that make it hard for you to work? Tom, do you want to start with that?
Sure. I think just keying off what Barbara said about the importance of the relationships and it's the local, state, and federal relationships around procurement policy and practices that are so vital. And part of it is follow the money that flows from the federal to the transactions of institutions, in particular the K-12 school food market, which has the reimbursable meals, maybe universal someday in the future. But
We're on our way.
We're in a very different moment in this relationship between federal, state, and local. And it's odd because, and I think there's silver linings and dark clouds both. The silver lining, I'll start with the positive, is that there is a level of political support at the state and local levels that we've never seen for the deliberative or mindful procurement that we're talking about here, inclusive of the infrastructure between supply and demand, inclusive of investing in new wholesale-ready farmers to provide high-volume quality foods to the institutions we're talking about, including corrections, including schools, so that is the state, local level. And right now there is a administration in place that actually provides another parallel level of leadership and openness to, although there are differing opinions about how effectively this administration's U.S. Department of Agriculture is moving on the new regulations, still, compared to the past, it is a remarkable, positive atmosphere. But we have dark clouds on the horizon. I don't know if I'll let others talk about that more, but there is a major threat to these entitlement programs, and it's not just the
they're
child nutrition
expensive.
programs. Well, relative to what? I mean, what's also on the chopping block or SNAP, which is very important relative to school food, and all the food nutrition programs, which constitute the U.S. food safety net, which keeps acute hunger from the door in this country, are all on the chopping block. Mm-hmm. And we saw in the last Farm Bill a fight, we saw in the last child nutrition a fight, we saw the rob Peter to pay Paul, which in this case is child nutritions get more funding at the expense of SNAP. We have a budget that's as draconian as the House proposal for Farm Bill, which was to cut SNAP by $40 billion. That didn't happen. That fight is expected again.
It's not over yet.
It's not over. And so the question of what a city like New York, which has a huge amplification, by the way, on the national scene, does with other cities, the other big cities, but also other states. And I won't go into the weeds more than that for now, but I think the politics are at all those levels. And the question is how you manage those relationships for the most productive outcomes.
Jan, you want to comment on that?
Well, I'll just chime in that the specific threat that we keep hearing about, besides a cut in the total amount of funds allocated for SNAP and possibly for school food, is the threat of block granting. And block granting turns the decision-making about these programs over to the states. Block granting is what happened to welfare, okay, in a process that some of us still call welfare deform. And the outcome of welfare reform was that the federal investment was fixed, and TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, proved singularly unable to respond to the recession. So if you look at the chart, you'll see that SNAP, the formerly known as food stamps, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, tracked unemployment and responded and became a lifeline for families because TANF was not able to expand because the states had found other uses for that money and because the counter-cyclical nature of performance funding, when something is based on, you know, funding for each person served in an entitlement program, there's a built-in capacity to respond to economic changes, to recessions. And when you take that away, you lose that capacity, and that's what happened to TANF. And I am very troubled by something that I'm thinking of as the welfarization of food stamps, because I am hearing the same language about SNAP users that we used to hear about AFDC recipients.
Right.
The same characterization of them as irresponsible, ripping off the government. There was a Fox News special that had a surfer dude who was getting SNAP, and he became the iconic poster child for the attack on SNAP. So I have to say, we can't let this happen, because I was sorry not to have been here for the hunger session yesterday, but it came up in this morning's company. These are our friends and neighbors and fellow residents of New York and our people all across the country. We can't let this happen. So that's a little, I was going to say that we in the academic world are insulated from politics, but maybe I won't try that. Maybe I won't
Don't
try
we
to
wish?
pass that one off. Right. But watch out for block grants.
Yeah, some states are going to handle block grants better than others, but all of them will suffer. Though I don't think it'll pass. I'm optimistic that it won't. Eric, you want to comment on the politics that you're up against?
You know, as we're operations people, so we have to manage interests, not politics, because politics is going to change one way or the other, and at the end of the day, you're still going to have to serve food, and kids are going to be hungry, and whether it's SNAP or whether it's school food, it's going to be here no matter who's in power. So we have to be very, religious about guarding the interests and making sure that we can provide not only the food, but the best quality food through whoever happens to be in power, and we just have to be sensitive to that, because that it just invariably will change at some point.
Yeah, Barbara, this will be my last question, and it's a two-part question, really, and that is if you had one thing that you could do with your office in the next year or so, what would it be? And how can the people in this audience help you with that?
That's a
and
great
that's
question.
and I want that question for everybody.
You want
and then
this
we'll
on
open it up.
procurement? You want this on procurement specifically,
Or
anything?
Oh, I think anything, but if it
Yeah.
has to do with procurement, I guess that would be nice, but it's not necessary.
Let's raise the minimum wage.
Here, here.
Not bad.
Because here's the
And
thing.
how can your office help with
Because
that?
here's
and
the
how can people here help with that?
So my office is part of the mayor's office, right? So, I mean, I'm always look. As we all know, even within this issue we call food, which I always say to people, nobody's excited about food per se, actually. But if you say to me, we're going to run out of food in 2070, we're actually going to have less kinds of food available because of climate change, right? Then you have my attention. If you say to me, the number of people, the percentage of people who are rent burdened in this city continues to grow, so that over half of people in New York City are now paying more than 30% of their income on housing, so that they don't have that money to spend on food, then you have my attention, right? So when we talk about food, there are different people working on different aspects of this, but the kinds of stuff that I'm focused on, and the kind of stuff that I'm focused on, which is what I'll call nutrition security, which sort of goes beyond, it's a bigger bubble than food insecurity with hunger, right? It's a bigger chunk of things that we're working on. When I think about nutrition security, the biggest correlate to that is that people are unemployed, right? So the more unemployed people we have, the more underemployed people we have, the more people who are not able, because I just don't able to buy food that's healthy and access food that's healthy, and I don't really buy, I mean, you know, if we didn't need to have an institutional food system, that'd be fantastic, but we do, and if we didn't, I would like to get rid of, and the people who do this work know this, I mean, I would like to come to a day where we had no soup kitchens and food pantries any longer, because there is sufficient income. And there are a host of reasons that we don't have it, and it's becoming a more acute problem than a less acute problem. You can help. There is a Liz Kruger, who many of you know, worked at CFRC for many, many years, is one of the champions in Albany on raising the minimum wage, moving to a living wage. They've done this in London. We can do this here. So I think there's an absolute correlation between your income and your ability to maintain a healthy life for your household, and that's where we need to focus our attention. Now, within my own office, we spend a lot of time making sure that the safety net is indeed in place and that people are taking advantage of it. And we talk about SNAP as a work support, because increasingly, the people who are taking advantage of, or who need food stamps, who need SNAP benefits, are people who are in the workforce. There's some, I wish I had brought this statistic with me. I was not focused on this when I was preparing, but it's the percentage of people who work for the city, who are city employees, who also rely on SNAP benefits. Like, that's something that we need to attack right away, and we're trying to do that through some of our labor agreements, and the labor agreements, as you know, languished in the last administration. So those school crossing guards, when they get a raise, they have more disposable income. People who are low income will tell you what we really need. We don't want you to prescribe what we're doing with our money. We want you to give us sufficient money to meet the market basket of needs that our family has. And I think we need to work on that as our large strategy, and there's a number of things we can do within that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Eric.
What was the question again?
What's your dream about one thing that you'd really like to be able to do in the immediate future, and how can people help you?
Yeah, well, I would say, our most exciting vehicle for this right now is the Urban School Food Alliance, which I mentioned. And if I can borrow the plate, I'll give you an example. So, it's 6 cities. Other cities have asked to join us, which I think we'll do in future. And it really pools our purchasing power. So when New York City was looking at moving off of the rectangular styrofoam trays, right? I mean, at home, nobody eats on a rectangle. Everyone eats on something round or rounded. And the problem was those trays were really inexpensive, right? They were coming in at roughly 4 cents a tray. And in the 70s, when they took out all the dishwashers and all that stuff from the kitchens, it would cost $1 billion or more to put all that stuff back. So it's not a practical reality to put that stuff back. That would be the ideal. In our office, we have pictures of school food in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, and it looks great. I mean, it really looks like fantastic. So, what we needed to do is not to be, nostalgic, but how do we recapture some of that sort of like goodness that we just incidentally threw away over the years? So, we wanted to move off the trays. We looked at the plates. We talked to different manufacturers. They were coming in at 15 cents. So the jump from 4 cents to 15 cents in our volume was just simply unaffordable. But when we pooled our purchasing power with the other districts and we put out a bid for 271 million of these a year, we got industry to respond. And a Finnish company called Huhtamaki won the bid. These plates are being manufactured in America, being made in Maine with American workers from pre and post consumer recyclable material in a sort of a molded fiber. We tested the plates across America in our cities. It works. We got the price down to 5.5 cents through our volume, the power of mindful collective procurement in a way that's affordable. And now other districts want to join. And what we hope that this creates over the next year or two is a de facto national standard. So it's a round plate. It creates more of a home style feel for our children versus institutional feel. It's environmentally friendly. It's compostable. New York City is pretty advanced with this stuff, but other cities need to catch up. This could act as a catalyst in helping them be thoughtful about that. The design was done on purpose. Look, as I said, we're very prescribed here. We have to have these little barriers here for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of our younger kids, practically speaking, if this touches that, forget it, it's all over, they don't want to eat it. And that's just the way it is, we have to be very practical. But also, we need to get reimbursed from the federal government, and we have to serve the right portions. We put milk in the middle, we tested it out, that it balanced, that has the right heat transfer on the bottom, all these technical things. But really, to roll this out as a de facto national standard, then to follow with the chicken, and we're working on a few other things, that would be my immediate goal.
Great, thank you. Jan?
Right, and there's no room on here for à la carte items once you've got the
Right.
agreement. Okay. So I'm going to play the same tune again. I think we need to move to universal as quickly as possible. I think it's just 12 years since I started working on the book on school food, which became Free for All. So the kids who were in first grade when I started studying school food are graduating this spring. And, you know, it's the twinkling of an eye. So if we start now with school food as a real part of the school day, it's such an opportunity for education, for teaching kids about food and where it comes from and why it's good for you and what's healthy. I think we can really transform this system, get rid of the stigma. The stigma issue came up again and again and again in my research, and what I'm hearing from the communities that have gone to citywide community eligibility as a federal provision that we can use here in New York is that they're seeing all kinds of evidence that the stigma is evaporating. And this stigma, you know, it goes from the kids to the food. It's part of why the food isn't appreciated as it may deserve to be. So that's, I want us to move this year to universal free school lunches in New York, and I believe we'll see all kinds of positive outcomes. Plus, it'll really help families' budgets. So.
Thank you, Jan. Tom?
Yeah, so I would like to offer kind of a both and to everything that's been said, because I do think there's not just, there's a suite of very important priorities, and I'd like to connect back with something said yesterday, because I see this as at the fulcrum of bringing some of the changes about that we've talked about. So you've heard the critical importance of the wage increase, the collective leveraging and buying power of districts, and the universality that is needed in feeding good food to all kids. I think in addition, what we heard yesterday was the way it was put was that we need to be thinking about more farmer-centric supply chains, but I think what was really being called for there was that there's a gap in the scaling of the producer's capacity to meet the volume needs of cities, and in particular, we're talking about institutional food service, but I think it's all markets. And I would echo, I think the food security system, and not the food system only, but the food security system, if we're looking at 2070, I don't even think it's going to be that long before the enormity of the changes are beginning to be felt.
Right.
And I think every locality is starting to get gripped by this, that the food system managers and the decision-making really have to be brought down to earth, brought down to local, because in terms of the private market and the public plate, many of the decisions are not local. And we have to beg, steal, and react for most of the big ticket decisions. And I think that's got to change. So localizing the decision-making on a food security system agenda that includes all these kinds of priorities, I would say, is what I put on the table.
All right, thank you. We're going to open it up to questions now, and the microphones are right here. If you have a question, a comment, anything you want to say, just come forward, and you can ask either specific or general questions, but just come right up here, and as soon as somebody gets here, I'll call on you. What's impressive to me about what I've heard this afternoon is the capacity of and the ability to make real changes in the food system. If you decide that you want to buy from Hudson Valley Harvest, which is an aggregator of the produce from the products of local farms, you could have an enormous impact on agriculture in the Hudson Valley region. If you decide you want antibiotic-free, if you decide you don't want colors and food additives, if you decide you want food of a particular quality, as long as you can figure out how to make it meet the regulations, and really everybody is very clever and should be able to do that in some way, then you can produce food that's really healthy and good for the kids, and the kids will love it, and it'll be better for everybody. So that's what all of this was about. Yes?
Thank you all very much. I found this very uplifting, and things have been so negative in the everything around us these days that I do feel optimistic about what I'm hearing here, and I thank you all very much. You've got difficult jobs, and I can see that you're all very well qualified and passionate about them, and it's making me feel good. But I do have a question. I have more than one, actually, but I'll limit it. I just wanted to let you know that I really appreciate everything you've contributed today and are contributing on our behalf in this state. I'm concerned about the water shortage in California and what impact that is going to have on the cost of the food that I assume that a lot of the food that you're using in the school service and to feed people in New York is coming from California. Costs are going to be astronomical as the water supply gets less and supply and demand and so forth. And so I'm hoping, and I'm pretty sure that you must have some plan in place to cope with this oncoming tsunami of high costs of produce from California. I'm wondering, I'm very encouraged about using local supplies and farmers. You know, everybody in this room probably shops at the farmer's market, and we see the enthusiasm for local produce. I'm concerned about what Carol Karp spoke about yesterday, like the logistics of getting the food, not only supplying the demand, but the demand is there. It's very complicated. I know that. I don't expect anyone to say, oh, you know, we've got an answer for all
So
that.
you just want people to comment on
Yes,
what they're going to do about the cost?
yes.
Who would like to respond to that?
Well,
Eric, do you want to?
yeah, so, you know, when we'll
Thank you for
food
the
costs
question.
go up, we'll definitely feel the impact of that. You know, in the food world, there's a lot of substitutability. So if one particular item is outrageously expensive, you could use one of these contrived words like demenu. You could, like deplane. You could demenu that particular item. But you know, some of the big manufacturers, like you know, the carrot market in the United States is really controlled by two companies. They have about 90% of the market. And you know, we work closely with both of those companies, and they grow not only in California, they grow in Canada, they grow in different regions of America to offset the climate risk that California presents. So you'll see companies start to adjust, and then on our side, we can adjust if particular prices become exorbitant to the point where we can't afford it. So there is that substitutability that we'll have to leverage.
I just have one comment about that. Years and years ago, I audited Joan Gussow's nutritional ecology course, and the thing I remember most was her describing the history of 20th century agriculture as the migration of agriculture away from the rain toward the sun, moving from east of the isohet where there was enough rainfall a year to where it had to be irrigated. Oh, come back, agriculture.
Iowa, with all that topsoil that's being used to grow corn and soybeans, right? You had a question.
I did. As we improve the quality of the food that's served in the schools, I'm wondering, or other institutions, I'm wondering whether the machines in your kitchens are up to the job of producing and/or serving the kind of food we really want to serve, because it's a huge capital expense to upgrade that.
Eric, that sounds like yours.
Yeah, no, I mean, the simple answer is we're up to the job. So, but a more detailed answer would be that, you know, the technology of food also is changing. So what they call IQF, which is the freezing of vegetables really quickly, plays a large part in food institutions. And from a nutritional point of view, I am told, and I do believe, that it is of superior quality because...
I was thinking more in the line of muscle chicken versus chicken
Kitchens.
nuggets.
How about just kitchens in general? Are there still schools, lots of schools that don't have them?
Yeah, most schools do. We have about over 1,250 kitchens in New York City. New York City schools, you'll find them all over the place in different locations. So not all the schools have kitchens. To those schools, we provide the classic New York delivery service. So takeout plays a role in our school system too for some of our children. But you know, the chicken, we don't bring in New York City, we don't bring in raw proteins into our kitchens for a health safety point of view. So we're not too concerned about that. We have ways to handle that. So if I think that your question is, you know, different sort of knife skills and that sort of thing, I'm not particularly concerned about that.
Yeah.
The capital expense of moving to other forms of the food, that is, you either have to have central kitchens and then truck to your schools, or you have to have kitchens in all the schools.
Yeah, in New York City, we do not have central kitchens.
Yeah.
You have a question.
Except,
Yes.
you know, the hospitals.
Hi, my name's Emily. I'm earning my master's in nutrition and public health at Teachers College, and I had a question for Barbara. I wanted to say I applaud your call for a higher minimum wage, and recently we've heard proposals for 1010 across the nation, and 350.org is proposing $15 an hour. I was wondering if you had a particular target in mind for New York City.
Yeah, the mayor's target is 15. The governor has proposed 1150 statewide.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And for those of you particularly who are interested in this, there's also something called the Self-Sufficiency Index that's published, commissioned and published by the United Way of New York City, and that actually takes a look at it from the perspective of what does it cost for a family of, you know, 2 adults and 1 preschool child, or 2 adults and 1 preschool, 1 middle school child, or 1 single adult to live in different parts of the city. It's a pretty specific set of indicators, and that, of course, indicates that it probably should be higher.
Yeah, we're coming to the end of this session, so we have 2 more questions, and there you are. If you can make the questions really brief, and if the responses can be really brief.
Thanks for the beautiful plate. It's quite an accomplishment. And question for Barbara, can you tell us a bit about the relationship between meals for schools and those for the correctional facility? Are the ingredients the same? Yeah.
So yeah, so of course I managed to get through this entire panel without talking about the New York City food standards. How is that possible?
Here's your chance.
Yeah, so one of the reasons this job was actually created by Mayor Bloomberg in 2008 was to give mayoral muscle to the creation and implementation of the New York City food standards, which is still, you know, in the executive order, one of my 2 chief jobs, is to make sure that rollout happens. So the nutrition standards are a set of, you can find them on the web. They're clearly available to you. You can read between the lines, and you can see the Talmudic discussion that went on each of the different, you know, agencies and populations and so forth. So there is some variation, but the idea is to take what the Institute of Medicine has come up with, you know, the science behind nutrition, and to figure out for different age groups and activity levels what the appropriate amount of calories and nutrition would be. And of course, those are also the standards that that limit sugars, limit salt, describe the standards for fluid milk, all kinds of different
And people can go
standards.
online
Yes,
and
and you
see
can go
those.
online and take a look at those. So that's, I urge you to take a look at those. And they're for vending as well.
Thank you. Question.
Hi, my name is Nathan, and I have a question about, it's probably for Eric and Barbara. Are you going to be set up, or are you set up now, or have you thought about for accepting multiple bids on a product if they can't meet the scale? Because there is that scale gap that was talked about. So And in that light, there's a big preference on local in terms of the origin of the food. How about local in terms of the business? So a business that's in New York State that has economic multipliers going to
Yeah, and
those
that's part
rural
of Local Law
communities.
50 is it's not just produced, but not just grown, but it can also be a New York, like apple butter, right, is included. But you want to talk about school and
Yeah, I mean,
regard to this?
there are all sorts of bidding. You can partner on bids and all this type of stuff. So when we put out bids, we have pre-proposal conferences. That's a great time. It's an important time to come and tell us, hey guys, you should think about this, you should think about that. And that we very much listen to what's said at these pre-proposal conferences. Again, when you talk about local, it's primarily an economic term. And you're looking at sort of links in the value chain, you know, grown, produced. So anywhere that there could be jobs attached to local, I think that's meaningful to government.
Very important to us. And I just want to also say that in addition to Eric, about $100 million of our public purse is spent by DCAS, which is the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. They are the purchaser, the bulk purchaser for a lot of other agencies that have direct services. And then we also require, if you're running a senior center and you're a nonprofit, you have to abide by our guidelines, and they get bids or they work with caterers.
Yeah, this sounds like a conversation that needs to take place afterwards. I've been told we have to stop. I'm really sorry. So we have to stop now. Fabio, you have a few final words, but in the meantime, let's thank the panel very, very much. You did great.
Thank you to Marion and the panelists. This has been very interesting. And yes, this is a very complicated conversation. Unfortunately, we have to close now. It's 1. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And please, if you want to stay in touch with us, be updated about our events and our activities, leave us your emails, and we'll be happy to do that. And I will see you at the next event, I hope. Thank you.